What is the freakiest/creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Serious. For 2 years, I had a roommate who was on meds for psychosis. It was me, him and another guy. He was fine, but a little weird. Me and the other dude always made sure to include him in stuff, because we didn't want him to feel isolated and possibly worsen his mental state. He never blew up or anything like that, just a quiet and awkward guy. He was not a drinker. The three of us would go to the pub, but he never had more than one beer. He'd spend the night stoically listening to our nonsense, sometimes chiming in. But this night was a little different. That day he seemed really chipper, much happier than ever before. Not manic or anything, just positive and energetic. When I came home from work, he was chatting with the other roommate and was cracking jokes. We go out to the pub, and I get uneasy because he downs his first beer and asks for another, the very first time he has more than one. After he finished his second beer, I took the other roommate aside, and we decided to just keep an eye on it. He was having a blast. We didn't want to ruin his fun. He was having more fun than we've ever seen, and it looked like his whole mindset was turning in a positive direction. Eventually we were all 8 pints in. This was irresponsible of us. We had never seen him drunk before, and had no way of knowing how he handled alcohol. Surprisingly, he was fine. He hit on a few girls, and got some interest in return. We had never even seen him talk to a girl before. When he came back we just had to ask him, "Why are you so happy today?" He said he got some good news, that his father passed away. We put it together, that he didn't have the best relationship with his dad. He went into all the abuse he's experienced growing up, how he'd watch his dad beat his mom and little sister, powerless to stop him, or how he'd get tied up in the freezing garage for entire nights as punishment for tiny infractions. Just awful stuff. We did a cheers to this, because it looked like he was starting to find meaning in life after his abuser was gone. One morning, 2 days later, he was arrested. That day he was so happy, he drove 2 hours back to his hometown and bashed his dad's head in. The worst part is everyone come out to say, on Facebook, that the abuse never happened, including his mom and sister, because he was apparently saying these things to the police. The story made some waves in our state as well, with the court concluding that the abuse probably didn't happen. Edit. Confusing wording. Possibly we went to the pub the evening after he did the deed. He drove out that morning and came back before I got back from work. I worked at a subway during a period of time where a serial robber was hitting multiple subways each day and becoming violent. I worked at a particular subway that was the easiest target of them all. One employee at night, not in a shopping center, off from the main road, small parking lot covered with trees. The cops would actually come check on me at night due to how sure they were this dude was gonna rob it. One night a guy came in and started fidgeting with the front door. He said he thought something was wrong with it, but then said it was fine. The guy was really nice the whole time, but started asking some odd questions about what time I get out with all the robberies happening. I felt it was odd, and lied saying I left later than I did. Later that night I armed the alarm and go to close the door, but it won't close at all. The alarm goes off. Cops fly in the parking lot. One cop starts looking at the door and finds a really small magnet that stopped the door from closing. He placed it there, so I couldn't close the door. During this time a car rolls by slowly, but everyone wrote it off as someone thinking it got robbed. A couple days later they catch him, and it's that dude. I see footage of his car, and it was the car that drove by while I was still with the cop. I've told this story before, but it is still by far the creepiest thing to happen to me. When I was 16 I had just gotten my license as well as my first after school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent parking lot and take a nap. This was a shopping strip with a grocery store, restaurants, and a bank on a fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I'm sitting there drifting off, I see a black Denali pull up behind me, blocking my car in the spot. A gentleman jumps out in a business suit and asks if I can help him. He looks nice enough, and I'm assuming he is looking for directions. He starts to explain to me that his wife and he were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us today so that they can purchase a boat, but she is stuck in a meeting and can't make it. He then asks if I wouldn't mind posing as her and singing the documents for her. I'm completely blown away, but super shy, and feel the need to let him down easy. Stupid, I know. So I tell him I don't think they'll believe I'm your wife. He then tells me it's fine. He has her license with him, which he shows me, and she has the same hair/eye color as me, so they won't know. At this point I'm freaking out. I start to notice how disheveled he looks. He's sweating, and surprise surprise, no wedding ring. I just want him away from my car, so I start telling him I can't help him, that he needs to go ask someone else. He says it's fine, it'll be quick, just jump in my truck and I'll take you over there. Like I said, this bank was in the same shopping strip, there would be no need to drive to it. Even in my gullible teenage mind I know this story is complete bull. I'm telling him no over and over while scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be noticing, but of course no one has. He then starts getting irate, telling me that I'm perfect and the only one who can do it, how beautiful I am, can he at least take me to dinner, and so on. I start trying to close my window, and he reaches through, grabs my shoulder and starts trying the door handle, which was luckily locked. I'm so frozen I don't even really react, I can't go anywhere as he's blocking me in. Suddenly, and I'm not really sure why, I just blurt out that I'm only 16, and for some reason that freaks him out. He slowly backs away, gets in his truck, and leaves. I called the police afterwards, but they never followed up with me. But I just know he had found that license and made up that story as a way to lure women into his truck, and it scared the hell out of me that he could have convinced someone before. Years later I spotted him on the sex offender registry for assault. I was about 10, and I had a huge fear of someone being in my house, to the point where I wouldn't go to the basement because it scared me. But I'm glad I had that fear, because one day during the summer I was trying to go to sleep and I heard a noise from above me and I freaked out. I then noticed over the coming days that my room was really hot, and I thought this was strange because we just got new air vents put in. My dad was checking them out and went to get some sort of tool when I saw the scariest image possible. There was a skinny man looking at me and my dad from the vent in my ceiling. I froze and pretended not to notice him, and I went to get my dad, and me in my 10-year-old mind was instantly thinking run with him out of the house, but I have 2 cats and was scared to leave them, so I grabbed a paper towel and a pen and wrote in my chicken scratch handwriting, "There is a man in my vent," but he couldn't read it and asked what it meant, and that's when we heard a thud and he looked at it again and must have put it together. Because he grabbed me and called the police. When my mom got home she got to see the man being dragged out of the house in cuffs. Even though he was caught and I still had a somewhat happy ending, the image of looking up and seeing his face and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream still haunts me. My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but I still don't know how or why. We are 6 years apart, but went to the same high school at different times. Small school, graduating class is about 60. Years later, we are on a road trip together several states away and decide to stop at a Huddle House for coffee. We walk in, and the guy at the next table turns around and smiles and says, "You went to Town High School, right?" When we say yes, he says he and his girlfriend, also at the table, smiling and not talking, went there too. We didn't recognize them, but smiled politely, commented it was a small world. He starts to rapidly talk about different things from the school, just disjointed comments that were a bit odd. He talked like a salesman, almost. At first, we smile and nod, but he had weird facts wrong. So we ask what year he graduated. He claimed not to remember. So we asked follow-up questions, and he gets cagey. Suddenly the girlfriend, oh yes this isn't working, and they suddenly pay and leave, food unto shade. We since have determined they didn't go to our school, and have tried to figure out how he knew what he did, to no avail. Edit, because I got some questions. Neither my cousin nor I lived in my hometown by this point. The car wasn't bought in our hometown and didn't have any stickers etc. From there, the guy had just enough facts correct, 1 or 2 teachers' names, and a diner across the street, totally off the cuff, that we really questioned it afterwards. When I was about 5 I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mum, dad and sister. We were walking towards the city center, so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand, and then feeling him grab back hold of it a few moments later. I kept walking, I don't know how far. I hear my dad shouting from behind me, and grabbing my other arm. I hear him say sorry, and I look up, and I realize I was holding hands with an old man that I didn't know. My dad assumed that I'd accidentally grabbed onto this man's hand thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away all embarrassed, and I was just thinking, but the man grabbed my hand? So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed onto his hand. My parents were normally quite paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted when talking to my grandma. I was probably 9 years old, in about 1995. At that time all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day I was riding my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green 2-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid, we lost our dog, can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off, and I thought for a split second that this was it, I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline shot through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10x louder and see everything 10x better. I've never felt anything like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking and tears were pouring down my face, even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy. I was home alone sleeping when all of a sudden I felt a presence crawling up onto my bed. I can hear the sheets ruffling and feel the bed sinking. All while I hear a soft laughter getting louder and more intense as it gets closer to me. Finally, after what felt like it was literally next to my ear, I wake up. As I turned my head to look to see what the hell was laughing at me, I see this nondescript figure hovering over me and burst out in what I could only describe as the most aggressive laughter, all while shaking my bed violently. My head felt like it was being rattled from all the shaking. At that moment I wanted to scream as loudly as I could, but I could not summon the strength to so much as turn my head away from what I was seeing. I was terrified and angry. Angry at myself for being absolutely terrified and not being able to even attempt to defend myself from this creature that had spent what felt like minutes taunting me. When I was finally able to muster the strength to fight back, it had already disappeared from the room with its laughs echoing. Turns out I have schizophrenia, and this was the first of many hallucinations that plagued me throughout my late teens to my mid-20s. With therapy and the early realization that it might be mental illness, I was able to keep myself relatively sane. That was almost over 15 years ago. It's gotten better and these days it doesn't happen as often, but when it does it, usually whenever I get severely stressed in a short period of time or moderately stressed over a prolonged period of time. Turns out I have schizophrenia, and this was the first of many hallucinations that plagued me throughout my late teens to my mid-20s. With therapy and the early realization that it might be mental illness, I was able to keep myself relatively sane. That was almost over 15 years ago. It's gotten better, and these days it doesn't happen as often, but when it does it, usually whenever I get severely stressed in a short period of time or moderately stressed over a prolonged period of time. Edit. Thank you all for the well wishes about my mental illness. I should clarify, up until this point I had my suspicions that something was wrong with well before this happened to me. Mostly it was auditory hallucinations. Hearing familiar voices when the people whose voices they belonged to clearly were not there, such as at the doctor's office, when I was sitting by myself, or a very loud foghorn like the ones on ships going off at home, when I was by myself. Hearing distant and distinct conversations in rooms that were empty, and shushing would stop the moment I stepped into the room. Hearing static noise, wherever you go, etc. And remembering events and conversations with friends that never happened. But this was the first full-blown sensory hallucination I ever had, with more to follow whenever I would try to sleep at night. Sometimes they would happen every day, and sometimes they would happen every other day or week. With all the little things that were off, it's easy to see how some people with schizophrenia can become paranoid and spiral down even further. I guess it really boils down to whether or not the individual can objectively assess what is happening to them. I happened to be lucky. I was already going to therapy for my depression and PTSD. My alcoholic father, his family, and my older brother were my abusers. And at one point, when we were children, he had attempted suicide. I did as well not too long after. So yay, my stress growing up was through the roof. So thanks to the techniques and practices I learned in counseling, I didn't hesitate to bring this up to my doctor, because there is nothing wrong with seeking help. And the calming techniques really helped with bringing my illness to a manageable level. My experiences on medication, well, that is a story for another time. Oh, almost forgot. Yes, that was in fact sleep paralysis. I've had them before, but this was the first time I was fully conscious during it. Whenever I had it before, I would always be in a semi-conscious half-dazed state. This one I was fully awake, eyes open. I felt its weight and its breath as it laughed in my face. Smelled like cherry medicine for some reason. Also, before anyone fully asks, no, the voices never told me to do anything or harm anyone. A lot of berating though. And also not carbon monoxide poisoning. It's state law in California that every home has to have a carbon monoxide detector along with a smoke detector, and my bed was no more than 3 feet from the co-detector. The freakiest thing that has ever happened to me so far is probably when I was around 10 years old. I had went to my mother's friend's house to help her prepare for her upcoming wedding. After a while, I see her husband going down to the basement, and I ask to go with. She says it's not a good idea, context that you'll get later. Eventually I talked her into letting me go down to the basement to go get some small, fake trees. The husband sees a blanket hanging up, then looks at me and grins. He asks if I want to play a game. Confused and innocent, I agree. I won't get into detail, but he tied that blanket around my head, restrained me with a weak copper pipe with my hands behind my back, thank goodness it was easy to bend, and asked how wide I could open my mouth. I showed him every alarm in my head going off, and thank goodness, before he could do what he was going to do, my sister fell upstairs, and I used that as an excuse to go upstairs, as they could discover us. I broke out of the pipe, took off that blanket, then ran upstairs. He kept asking me the entire night, wanna go downstairs and play that game? I constantly said no, and my mother eventually came and got me and my sisters. A few years later, and my mother asked me if that man ever did anything to me, and I retold my story. Long story short, he was picked up from Florida and brought back up north to be put in jail. Thank heaven for the victim that spoke up. I was too afraid. As for that context from the wife, I'm pretty sure she knew of all the pedophilia her husband was participating in.